Hey everyone, welcome to our research highlight for July 2025. My name is Claire McLean. I'm a physical therapist, the owner and founder of Rogue Physical Therapy and Wellness, a wellness program for people who have Parkinson's. We have a gym in Orange County, and we also have an online exercise program. I have been specializing working with people with Parkinson's for close to 18 years now. So every month I pick a study or an article, a review that highlights research and how it's relevant for people with Parkinson's. We're on a long streak right now, really focusing on exercise studies since that's our main focus. This month, I am going to be talking about a great article. Let's see which one. This one. Nope, this one. Intensive rehabilitation treatment in Parkinsonian patients with dyskinesias, a preliminary study with 6-month follow-up. Reason we're talking about this one this month is last month we talked about Spielman review, how might physical activity benefit patients with Parkinson's. If you did not watch that video, I highly recommend you go check it out, but they have a list of the potential benefits and they go over the research for each one. This article was published over 10 years ago. So 2011, 14 years ago. So a lot has been published since then, and we have more data to support all of this. But one thing that came up is the improved drug efficacy and optimization of the dopaminergic system, which is very exciting. You know, exercise is good for so many things, but a big factor is helping people have medications that work really well and timely and are effective and don't change too much over time. And my experience as a physical therapist, helping people exercise consistently at a high intensity over many, many years, is that the interaction between medication and exercise is very symbiotic. So in many cases, being on some medication and having a little more dopamine in the system helps people exercise better. And then when they exercise better and more, then their medication works better. And then what we see over the long term, over 10 years, is that in some cases, people are taking less medication than they were when they started exercising. In some cases, they're taking the same amount of medication as they were. In some cases, they're taking more. But the traditional trajectory for people living with Parkinson's is that they would need more and more over the years. It would feel like it didn't work as well, and they'd start to experience motor fluctuations of periods of time of medication working well, wearing off, taking the next dose, going through these ups and downs every day. Treatment like deep brain stimulation, surgery can be helpful for that as well. And there's lots of ways that medication can be tweaked to be optimized. But ultimately, we want to help in other ways too. Exercise, nutrition makes a big difference because the healthier your gut is and the more consistent your digestive system is, makes a huge difference as well in terms of oral medication absorption. So here I wanted to talk, there's not a lot of research that supports my experience that I was talking about, what can happen with people over time. And that my experience is that when people are exercising consistently, they really have a different experience with medication over the long term. There is not a lot of research looking at that, but we have some work from Giuseppe Fresita. I believe they are based in Italy. And this article was published in 2012, a long time ago. Of course, after I share this article, I'm going to go do a search and see if there's anything else that has been published more recently since then, looking specifically at dyskinesias. So they have an intensive rehabilitation program that they have utilized in a few different ways. They have looked at people who are newly diagnosed in the first few years and how doing intensive exercise impacted the need for medication over time. They have looked at implementing this intensive rehabilitation program in people who have atypical forms of Parkinsonism. So I will cover those articles in subsequent months as well. But the topic of dyskinesia has come up recently with some of our members. And so I just thought this was a really good month to talk about this one. So just looking at their abstract, it's always really helpful. So what they talk about is that a major adverse effect of levodopa therapy is the development of dyskinesia. Dyskinesia is extra movements, and it can be something smaller like a shoulder moving extra, or for some people, it affects their whole body and can be very bothersome. Michael J. Fox experiences this. You may have seen it in videos with him. In terms of our membership here, we do have a few members who have dyskinesia, but amongst the nearly 200 people who come here on a weekly basis, we actually don't have a lot of people who have dyskinesia. And perhaps that's because people who are coming here are exercising consistently. So that might be helping them keep medication doses lower, keep their brain functioning better, minimizing the chance of experiencing that symptom. Or it could just be a correlation. Obviously, if people have dyskinesia, they may be less likely to go out and about in public if that dyskinesia is bothersome to them, or if they feel a stigma or they feel uncomfortable experiencing that in public. So, I'm sure there is some of both, is what my guess would be. What they talk about, though, is that side effect of dyskinesia affects 30 to 40% of chronically treated Parkinsonian patients. So this, I think, is an important statistic. I'm sure there are articles and papers that have, somewhat variations, but out there, a lot of people are afraid of dyskinesia, and you would think that it's, 100% that everyone with Parkinson's is going to get dyskinesia, with the amount of fear that there can be surrounding this. But it's very interesting to see that it's only 30 to 40% of people, less than 50%, maybe right around a third of people experience it. And that is without us even without getting the chance to implement some of these things that could be really helpful. This group hypothesized that our rehabilitation protocol might allow a reduction in levodopa dosage without worsening motor performances, thus reducing frequency and severity of dyskinesias. So 10 people, so it was a small study, but 10 people underwent a 4-week intensive rehabilitation treatment, which will be called IRT going forward. Patients were evaluated at baseline, at the end of the month of rehabilitation treatment, and at a 6-month follow-up. Outcome measures were the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale, sections 2, 3, 4, and the Abnormal Involuntary Movement Scale, AIMS, so measuring that dyskinesia more directly. At the end of the inpatient or the intensive rehabilitation treatment, levodopa dosage was significantly reduced, passing from, on average, 1,000 milligrams a day, plus or minus 300. So people were somewhere in the range of 700 up to 1,300 and some, down to, excuse me, down, I'm not going to edit that out. Don't have time to edit. Down to 770 milligrams on average, plus or minus 333. So the plus or minus was similar, but basically reduced by almost 300 milligrams. Maybe that amount is probably by about 25% on average reduction. So how did they get this number? So the way that you get a levodopa equivalent daily dose, there is a formula online. If you Google levodopa equivalent dose, and there is a formula for every medication, whether it's straight carbidopa levodopa, Stalevo, Rytary, and then also medications that are non-dopaminergic, such as Rasadrolene, Azilect, amantadine. So you can take any medication that you are taking and enter it into these boxes and say how many milligrams you're taking. And there's a formula that relates each of those medications and how it equates to levodopa. Levodopa kind of being the gold standard and the comparison. So you can put in, even if you're taking multiple different medications, different types of medications, you can put those into this formula, and it will give you one number that is taking all those medications into consideration. What is your levodopa equivalent daily dose? If you're just taking carbidopa levodopa, you can do the math. If you're taking 25 over 100 and you're taking 3 pills a day, that is 300 milligrams per day that you're taking. And so some people have simple regimens, some people have more complex regimens, but knowing this total daily dose is helpful. It's something that you can use to track over time. It's something that you can use to track changes that are being made. Is this more or less, and by how much? So it's a very helpful website and information to do. So basically they showed that with good exercise, people were able to reduce their dose significantly. All outcome variables improved significantly by the end of the month-long training program. At follow-up, so that was 6 months later, all variables still maintained better values with respect to admission. So they got evaluated. They did exercise for a month. They got evaluated. 6 months later, they got evaluated again. They're saying at 6 months, they were still better than baseline, even though they had not been in that same intensive program that whole time. In particular, the AIMS score that was the abnormal involuntary movement scale. So that score improved, passing from 11.9 at admission to 3.1. So that went down by like 75% at discharge and 4.2 at follow-up. So slight increase, but still significantly below, less than 50% of what their score was here. Our results suggest that it is possible to act on dyskinesia in Parkinsonian patients with properly designed rehabilitation protocols, intensive rehabilitation treatment whose acute beneficial effects are maintained over time might be considered as a valid non-invasive therapeutic support for Parkinsonian patients suffering from dyskinesia, allowing a reduction in drugs dosage and related adverse effects. So at this point, if you're experiencing dyskinesia, there are medication adjustments. There are medications that can help try to reduce dyskinesia. There's the option of deep brain stimulation surgery. And with the information we get from this article, an intensive exercise program should absolutely be one of the options you have to reduce dyskinesia if it is something that you experience. So I believe this article is available free full text. I will post a link. So I'm not going to read the whole thing because I'm trying to keep these videos short. I'm not very good at doing that, but that is my goal. So there's an introduction, which is helpful. The methods, there's a couple things I highlighted. So it is 10 people. It is a small study. They were actually admitted to this rehabilitation institute. So people stayed there. So in addition to exercise, that does mean things like eating, and what they're eating might be a little bit different. Sleeping, daily activities, some other things probably are adjusted as well. Medications can be monitored by physicians on site. They were saying these people were treated with all different drugs: levodopa, COMT, MAOB inhibitors, dopamine agonists. And they did the math to figure out what their daily levodopa equivalent daily dose was. So what was the intervention? So it consisted of a 4-week physiotherapy program that had 3 daily sessions, 2 not consecutive. So they were like 2 and then 1, or 1 and then 2. The global duration of each session, including recovery periods, was about 1 hour. So people were doing 3 hours of exercise or therapy a day, 5 days a week for a month. The first session comprised of cardiovascular warm-up activities, relaxation exercises, muscle stretching exercises of the scapula, shoulder muscle, hip flexor, hamstring, gastrocnemius, the calf muscle, exercises to improve the range of motion of spinal, pelvic, and scapular joints, exercises to improve the functionality of the abdominal muscles, and postural changes in the supine position. So this sounds like some good aerobic exercise and power moves and stretching. Sounds great. The second session comprised of exercises to improve balance and gait using a stabilometric platform with a visual cue, and treadmill training with a visual and auditory cue. So helping people be able to move really consistently when they were on the treadmill. So treadmill training, wonderful. The last session was a session of occupational therapy aimed at improving autonomy in daily living activities, transferring from sitting to standing, rolling from supine position to sitting, and from sitting to supine, dressing, use of tools, exercises to improve hand functionality and skills, using screws and bolts, etc., things like that. Moreover, patients spent 20 minutes every day in front of a mirror in order to control involuntary and exaggerated movements. So you might think 3 hours a day sounds like a lot. It doesn't mean that it is 3 hours of intensive exercise. I would say in those 3 hours, maybe an hour to an hour and a half was more intensive exercise, and then more just movement and working on skills and working on balance and walking and mobility and fine motor dexterity. But this type of thing is difficult to access. It's not just easily available to do this kind of intensive program. This is one of the first times I've seen this kind of idea of spending 20 minutes trying to control movements. I think for a lot of people, they may even just feel a little bit sensitive, being in front of a mirror when they're dyskinetic. And in some cases, really trying to control it might make it be even stronger. So this is interesting, though, that this was part of a successful program. So something we should consider. We're not going to read all of this. So the results, all 10 patients, and the age of the patients was average of 70 plus or minus 8. So from 62 to 78. The duration of the disease was about 11.4 years on average, plus or minus 2.4, so 9-ish to 13. Completed the intensive rehabilitation treatment and 6-month follow-up control. There's characteristics of them, more details in table 1. At the end of the program, levodopa equivalent dosage was significantly reduced from 1,016 plus or minus 327 to 777 plus or minus 333. At follow-up, the levodopa equivalent dosage was unchanged. And so what is important here, what they said in the abstract, is they were able to reduce medication without it having a negative effect on motor symptoms. So normally, if you're having a side effect and you just want to go down on medications, you can, but in many cases, then the medication won't work as well and you'll have more motor symptoms. So what they said is they were able to reduce the medication, thereby reducing the dyskinesia, but people's motor symptoms were maintained and they were still feeling and moving just as well as they were before. All outcome variables improved significantly by the end of the treatment, and follow-up, they were still better than before. So then in this conclusion, I like this article. It's not a super long article. Great discussion, but then it gets pretty sciencey here. So for one, their results suggest that it is possible to act on dyskinesia in people with Parkinson's with this type of exercise. They start getting really into the science of how this might be happening. There are investigations in animal models that give some information. There's some research in humans as well, though it's a little bit harder sometimes to look at things like what's happening in the brain in humans. But they're talking about things like, in particular, the striatum part of the brain receives the most important glutamatergic innervation. It's at the site of interaction. Glutamate and dopamine is the source of the inhibitory outputs and is involved in the generation of motor fluctuations linked to levodopa treatment. In animal models, after denervation, the striatal plasticity is lost, but chronic L-dopa treatment is able to restore long-term potentiation of synaptic transition. So this part of the article is honestly, for me, a little bit difficult to understand. I read through, and I think the biggest take home is to say what is happening in the brain with exercise is high level science. It is happening at the level of synapses, at neurons, at connections between neurons. Those are the synapses. It is, changing the neurotransmitters that we're producing and how they're being used. Exercise is not just for our muscles or for our heart. It is for our brain, and it does really amazing things. So if you yourself are a scientist, or if you're interested in reading this, definitely read through more of it. A couple of things that were interesting that they said. So this study suggests the possibility that competition between correct motor behavior and abnormal motor response may depend on the balance between the trace memory of the two. So basically, if you have dyskinesia and uncontrolled movements, and that's happening more of the time than good controlled movements, it's basically you're going to get more and more of those uncontrolled movements. And so one of the ways that they're trying to, or one of the ways that they think this is happening, the mechanism of improvement, is not just the medication change, but that the more good practice of movements you get, which when you're doing 3 hours a day of therapy and you're getting feedback, you may start to be able to shift that balance, and more of your movements during the day are well controlled. And so then that can propagate over time. Another possible explanation may be related to a neurorestorative strategy. The effects of intensive exercise in promoting cell proliferation and neuronal differentiation in animal models are reported in large cohort of study. So there are a lot of beneficial things that happen with this high intensity of exercise. More deep science, more. Overall, these findings show that intensive exercise exerts beneficial effects on dopamine transmission in Parkinsonian mice models. It's not just about producing more dopamine, because if it was just about having more, then medication would work. You could take more and it would work better. But it's not just about having more, it's about how it's utilized in the brain, how it is transmitted. And that's where exercise and stimulating our brain through movement and exercise and engagement creates different changes in the brain than just adding dopamine to the system does. These neuroplastic effects of intensive exercise are probably related to increased expression of a variety of neurotrophic factors, In particular, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, and glia-derived neurotrophic factor, GDNF, are the most likely growth factors involved in this process. BDNF is a key component of a number of aspects of neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, new nerves, synaptogenesis, new synapses, and cell survival. While GDNF has been shown to promote the survival and differentiation of dopamine neurons and to maintain the survival of adult catecholaminergic neurons in mice. So in conclusion, our findings suggest that properly designed intensive multidisciplinary rehabilitation treatment using treadmill should be considered as a valid non-invasive therapeutic support for people who show dyskinesias. So to me, one, it means that exercising really well, keeping medications at a proper and helpful but lower dose is going to decrease your chances of getting dyskinesia over time. And if you do get dyskinesia, yes, there's medications and there's deep brain stimulation surgery. You have multiple options, but exercise should be one of those options. Whether you actually have to do 3 hours a day for 5 days a week, we don't know. We don't have research comparing all different amounts of time and how many days a week. But if dyskinesia is something that is bothering you in a significant way, doing an intensive program like this could very well be worth it and is something that should be considered. I hope you all found this study interesting. And to me, it's very, very significant. And I hope there has been some more research since this one was initially published. But that's what we can do. We can collect data ourselves and, see what works. And we're collecting data here at Rogue in terms of assessments and what people are experiencing. And I hope it motivates you to exercise and do a little bit more each day and try new things. And let me know if you have any questions. You can email me at claire@roguept.com. That is CLAIRE@ROGUEPT.com. Let me know if you have any questions or if you just appreciated this video, and I'll see you all next time.